My name is Josh Heumann. I'm the Curator of Education and Public Programs at the Power Plant, and I am pleased to welcome you to today's program in conversation with Mario Pfeifer and Stan Douglas. Before we begin, we respectfully acknowledge the past and present traditional owners of this territory and their unique role in the life of this region. For hundreds of generations, people have met on this land to live and learn together, just as we meet here to learn together. The Power Plant is committed to honoring Indigenous peoples' unique cultural and spiritual relationships to the land and waters, and their rich contribution to society. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And we ask that you respect the land and traditions of those who walked upon it for millennia before us. Now, yesterday was National Indigenous Peoples Day in Canada, which seems fitting that one of Mario Pfeifer's installations, Approximation in the Digital Age to a Humanity Condemned to Disappear, focuses on how colonization and the passage of time has impacted the Yagan people of Tierra del Fuego at the southernmost tip of Chile. Before I go any further, how many of you have already seen the exhibition? Excellent. And how many of you are going to go immediately following this program? Excellent. Thank you. So I think that will greatly benefit your understanding of this program one way or the other, to bracket this experience with viewing of the films in the videos in this exhibition. The Power Plant Summer 2019 season opened yesterday evening. We commonly have programs featuring the artists immediately before and following our opening because, for the very simple reason, they are in town to help install their works. This afternoon, we are delighted that Mario is here for what promises to be lively conversation about his work with celebrated Canadian artist Stan Douglas, the two having some shared history. Mario Pfeifer, born in Dresden, studied at the Academy of Visual Arts in Leipzig, the Universität der Künste Berlin, where Stan Douglas was a professor of photography and new media, and graduated from the Städelschule Frankfurt am Main. Pfeifer was a Fulbright Fellow at the California Institute of Arts in 2008 and 2009. Additional grants from the Goethe Institute and the German Academic Exchange Service led him as far as Bangkok, Mumbai, and New York. His works have been exhibited and his films have been screened extensively in Germany, as well as across Europe, Asia, and North America, including Toronto's Images Festival before this exhibition at the Power Plant, titled, "If You End Up with the Story You Started With, Then You're Not Listening Along the Way." Stan Douglas is a visual artist who lives and works in Vancouver and Los Angeles. Since 1990, his films, videos, and photographs have been seen in exhibitions internationally, including 4 Venice Biennales and Documenta's 9, 10, and 11. A survey of recent work, Stan Douglas, Mise en Scène, traveled throughout Europe from 2013 until the end of 2015, and his play, Helen Lawrence, toured internationally until 2017. He was the 2016 recipient of the Hasselblad Prize, and since 2009, he has been a core faculty member in the Grad Art Department of Art Center College of Design in Pasadena. As we proceed, I hope that everyone will set their cell phones to vibrate, and also if you are taking any pictures, which I will be taking some pictures, please don't use a flash. The Power Plant thanks those who have made Pfeifer's exhibition possible. Support donors Alyssa Neuton and David Dime, our international art partner, the Goethe Institute, and additional support from Audio Spotlight by Holosonics and KOW Berlin. Following today's program, our summer season continues with Sunday scenes, with some film screenings, Power Kids for Families, and more. So please grab a summer 2019 program guide or visit thepowerplant.org. And now, please welcome to the stage Mario Pfeifer and Stan Douglas.
When I was invited to do a show at a project space called Ludlow 38 in New York, and I was living at the time in New York, I pitched that idea that I would really love to do that because it was a project space in New York City, and hip-hop somehow was born in New York City, in Harlem, in the Bronx. And so we set out in this endeavor, and at the time it was 2015, Black Lives Matter happened. So if I would like to produce a music video, I thought it has to go back a bit to the roots of hip-hop. That means like pushing a social-political idea, talking about what's going on in our society. Yeah, this is what hip-hop stands for me. So we researched which younger rappers that wouldn't be signed to a label would maybe be potentially carrying such a message in their work. Yeah, so I wouldn't like to impose anything on them, but there would be a certain awareness that we were looking for. And also during my research, which kind of strengthened my idea, was an essay by Questlove, a musician, and he published a 6-part essay called "Why Hip Hop Has Failed Black America." Yeah, and that has a lot to do with the commercial aspects of the music industry. So to widen the audience, also to like a wide audience, the genre would undergo tremendous change in order to put out a very different message. And somehow, yeah, we compiled a list of interesting young rappers, and the Flapper Zombies were #1. And so basically I sent them an email if they would be interested, and part of my offer was not only to produce a music video under somehow a collaborative aspect, but also they would be totally independent and free, of course, in the composition of the music and the lyrics. On top of that, I thought they are musicians, so what is good for a group of musicians in terms of being acknowledged or making a step in their young career. So I offered them an EP, like a vinyl, like to produce a record, because in the previous project I actually already published a record with a musician, and I thought it would be like a good reference point for them to take me serious, because honestly I'm German and it might come across very strange that I would like to produce a rap video with exactly these 3 rappers. And it took them 3 weeks to answer, and I said, okay, well, that didn't go so well. It took me 3 weeks to draft this email because it's also not really like my environment. Let's say it like that. No, I mean, at that time I just pitched them, let's do an independent record. Okay. They weren't signed to a label. That was important to me because I'd never wanted to go through management and PR agencies and consultants. I wanted to have a direct relationship with the musicians I would be working with. But I thought a music video might come off as a visual product for them that might benefit me only. And I thought, you know, at first I'm interested in records, and that would be interesting for them maybe. Yeah. And the answer was that they were really thrilled by the offer, by the request to collaborate, but the EP actually played a major part in their agreement with me. I mean, before we actually talked about the imagery, the production of images, we talked about the song. Yeah. So they immediately came up with an idea they already had like in the pipeline. So they were working on a song that would reflect the current state of mind. And that was police brutality and the oppression as a young black man walking on the streets facing stop and frisk policy. So somehow getting the feeling of being a terrorist walking the streets of New York. Seemed very important to them. So they were working on the track and the lyrics, and they would always send me like every 2 weeks an email with untitled MP3. Yeah, and then we often met for dinners in Brooklyn, and we started to somehow lay out ideas, and a lot of the ideas came actually from them. So I, for example, offered them a green screen production. Yeah. That means we could have them in the studio, and we could think about the background of it. And what was quite important, for example, for me, I mean, then at first the song was sculpted. Yeah, so because you can't talk about the visuals without having a song. So an interesting moment was when they had the final song. It says in one of the first verses, "Black activist." So I still got the untitled MP3 email, and then at some point we changed it to the song title "Blacktivist" in agreement. So we had the topic, we had the theme, and then we looked at footage from body cams from some of my scenarios where police brutality appeared. That was very, very present at the time, and still is, unfortunately. So we compiled actually an archive of clips from YouTube depicting police brutality and gun violence in the States, paired also with somehow, yeah, gun violence, how it is depicted in the hip-hop genre. Right. Then we agreed on a storyline for the studio production. So they would appear as rappers, but also they would take on different identities that somehow match with their identities as rappers. So they are zombies, for example, so they are constantly reborn. But they also wanted to perform as terrorists. Yeah? They also requested that there would be machine guns on the set, which scared me somehow.
Right.
What you just saw were also like kind of workshop clips, yeah, where people assemble something that looks maybe a bit dangerous with all the wiring. And this is footage from Defense Distributed. So in the moment we talked about having machine guns on the set, it was also interesting to think about, yeah, maybe like the weapon industry and the weapon culture in the US. And I heard at the time about a company called Defense Distributed, which is a company that produced a 3D printed gun, and later on a 3D milling machine that could produce receivers for an AK-15. So that was for me a completely new dimension of who would own a gun, who would actually produce a gun in their private premises, and what would be the effect for a society. Yeah, and what are the political motives behind that company actually? Because they ended up in a lawsuit with the State Department and also lobbyists of the NRA, because you could print your own gun or you could print parts of a gun without registering it. And they really have very strong political motives. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting reading. For me, it's a little less confusing because also I wouldn't say that the video is per se about Black Lives Matter. It's about maybe black activism and in form of hip-hop, yeah, in form of a freedom of speech. And what is important to know, and that part you would only actually get either through research or walking into the two-channel installation, is that Defense Distributed, which I experience as a very extreme way of carrying the First and Second Amendment in terms of owning and producing a gun, and also being very notorious against the state authority, against policemen per se also, is that the machine operates on a source code. That means the code actually controls the machine. The code tells the machine what to do. And Defense Distributed published that code into the World Wide Web, and it was sued. Yeah, so they had to take down the code. And their argument was always like, it's a code, it's an arrangement of numbers and characters and signs, so the freedom of speech applies because it's a form of poetry. Yeah, what would somebody do with the code is up to them, but the code itself cannot be suppressed. Yeah, so it's actually an interesting term because in the end we talk about freedom of speech as a center point, and then you go from there to who would be producing a gun or carrying a gun, and what would happen then with that gun, and against whom is it pointed. So it's a larger issue actually, I think, than just like the particulars of Black Lives Matter, because I think in the moment where a society allows guns into civilian hands, you do have a problem, and as you can see, taking these guns back is almost impossible. Yeah. So in the way, for example, also the rappers are portrayed in the installation, they are close-up shots of actually only their mouths. So there is a certain analogy of a weapon in terms of freedom of speech and the actual weapon that shoots. Yeah? And I also thought it's an interesting parallel between explicit lyrics in the genre, but also like the suppression of freedom of speech. So there are censorships in both worlds. And that has also something to do with the digitization of these tools. Yeah, and I thought that was interesting, that it's a code versus lyrics. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me it was interesting also in the preparation for the music video that that would go online. That was part of the plan. So I was very interested to think about a piece of art online on YouTube that might not look like a piece of art for that audience per se, but at the same time, so we opened the exhibition, let's say on a Wednesday, and on a Friday we put it online. I was with the Flatbush Zombies in their house, and it took like an hour, and we had 100,000 views, really based on also their crowd that follows them. and comments started to come in, and that was really, really exciting. The Flatbush Zombies always said, never read the comments, you're gonna go crazy. But I read them, and I didn't go crazy. I really, really enjoyed it because you had this immediate feedback. Yeah, so I must also say for the initial exhibition, we had a huge crowd of followers of the Flatbush Zombies coming in. Even I was offered like fortune cookies in the show, kind of cannabis cookies.
Oh.
Yeah, so I was totally stunned because I had to deal with two audiences mixing. The audience I was used to, like an art audience that would come anyways, or they would come because they're interested in the project or interested in me. And suddenly you had more of a music crowd, very young crowd in the exhibition, and that felt just really stellar and stunning to me because that is something we were trying to achieve. Basically also being interested to see why the museum is such a big barrier for certain audiences. Yeah, why can't we bring such topics into the museum? I mean, it has happened in LA with graffiti shows or also other music-related shows. But somehow that was for me a testing ground. Can I widen my audience, and can I also challenge the museum? Yeah. Open your fucking mind.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, this is something that they come up with. I mean, at the time there was the huge discussion. Also, there was a Confederate flag and taking down sculptures, public sculptures, and they would say, well, let's alter it, and also let's pretend we become terrorists, and but let's put our message on it in Arabic. And in each concert at the time, they were ending the show with "Open your fucking mind" to that crowd, which is quite a political statement to understand what you look at. Yeah, I thought they are really marvelous guys, fairly young, and they understand that they can guide their crowd into what they believe is a more democratic, fair society. And also the hostage was an idea they came up with, so it was Barack Obama, their president, that they didn't believe would protect them from the brutality they would experience and the violence in their life. So we thought that that would be quite a tricky thing to do for an online audience, but you know, we never had any backlash or any FBI emails coming in. So again, editing the film with them, also partly at their house, was yeah, something for me really amazing, because you think about imagery very differently. Also, compared to their knowledge, I know nothing, and to bring that piece together, and also to go through their YouTube channel, and this is still like going on. And I just checked the comments this morning. It's still going on, and I'm quite happy about that. So we actually had an art forum review on the show, and then I compared it to YouTube comments and also Genius, which is a platform online where people annotate the lyrics. So if you wouldn't have the knowledge of the cross-references in the lyrics, you could go there and read them. And it is really remarkable how they deal with poetry, how they explain every word, what it relates to, which person is in the picture. And then they come up with like video descriptions like, Black Tourist was released by the Flatbush Zombies on the 2nd anniversary, September 11th, 2015. The socially conscious music video has a revolutionary vibe and look, where one points to President Obama is seen being taken hostage with a bag over his head, kneeling in front of the zombies. Also, because this is the last thing before you have to move on, yep. It was voted as the best music video of the year by one guy online, and we got about 10 top 30 right. Comments. So I thought it was really marvelous. Maybe a few information. So Martin Gesinde was a German missionary that worked in Santiago de Chile, and he became a self-taught anthropologist who went down to Isla Navarino, or how the indigenous community called it, Chunuco. And he started to photograph the last free living Yagans in Sagnam ala Kaluf between, I think, 1918 and 1923. He also took sound recordings of their ritual chants. And these are very remarkable images that I actually was pointed out in Chile on a first trip, because the museum invited me to do a show. And so I would take a first trip, and then another artist pointed me out to Martin Gesinde, because he's not, that famous. I've never heard about him before that. And it turned out that there is a huge archive of really, really wonderful photographs or let's say special photographs that is a kind of visual introduction to, in my case, the Yagan culture, but also like linguistic studies, sound studies, studies of objects. And it turned out that the archive of this material is housed in Germany in the mission that he was part of, in St. Augustine near Cologne. So I went to that archive and looked at it, and it was all like non-labeled shoeboxes. So it was kind of an intriguing archive, because on the one side it felt really dead and should be activated. On the other side, I also wondered, why is this archive here physically? Yeah. So then I decided to start a project by installing myself, like Gesinde, on Shinjuku, and see if I could produce a work of art. And I gave myself about 6 months' time and a certain budget that I was offered. But I didn't have preliminary questions when I arrived there. I just thought, okay, well, I need to learn about the culture and the people and the current situation now, when I'm there. Yeah, so I try to avoid to gather knowledge beforehand. I actually did bring digital copies to Shinjuku and put them on my iPad, and was asking members of the community to look at them. I didn't specifically ask them to identify anybody, because I actually didn't know how they would respond to that. So we had one meeting scheduled for 25 minutes where they would look at the images, and they would start to zoom and swipe, which they somehow didn't know one could do with a photograph before. So there was a quite interesting engagement with a digital device and archival footage on that device. And somehow they really traced some of their ancestors, people they would know, because they had somehow also other references. And we ended up like in a 90-minute session where they completely forgot time and were really stunned by how they could look now at images, because that was actually the Retina iPad, which somehow offers you a crisper image with 300 dpi. And that was something somehow at the core of the project, even though it happened very late during the production, that we would find a way to look at the culture that is said to be dying out. There's actually no active practice of the culture anymore. They deal with a lot through artifacts. But she was very, very sick at the time. She was also portrayed in many, many other sociologist, anthropologist studies. I met her several times, but I didn't want to work with her, because so many people had previously been working with her for, to somehow extract very specific knowledge. And so I actually worked with her son.
Right. So
So I took a hostel in the beginning, but there were several hostels available, workers' hostels, tourist hostels. But for me, it was more interesting, where is the hostel located? And I took the hostel next to Vila Ukika, which is the village that was created by the administration of the city of Porto Williams when the army restructured Isla Navarino, and they asked all indigenous members to assemble in Vila Ukika. So they kind of ghettoized the last remaining Yagans. And that's where they live till today. And I took the first hostel on the street there, and eventually I was somebody who was just walking around asking no questions, don't really sign up for tourist things. I wasn't a scientist. I was a complete stranger. When they would ask me, somebody would ask me, what are you doing? Oh, I'm an artist, so they also wouldn't know what that means. And eventually, since I was taking long walks and we went to the supermarket, the only one, Martine came up to me and asked me this general questions, what are you doing here? Okay, there was not a real answer from my side, because I just said I would spend time. So he asked me if I could drive a car. And I said yes, and he would ask me, do you have a car? And I said, well, no, I just got here like 10 weeks ago. And he asked me if I could rent a car, and I rented a car and I started to help him. I was driving his boat motor to the ritual site where he had a house, where he constructed his own house. He was allowed to do that, and that's how our relationship began. And then I moved into his house, and then we started to live together. And at one point he would ask me if I had a camera, and I said, well, I do, because I never exposed the camera. And he asked me whether I would like to take a photograph, because there was a National Geographic photographer some years ago, and he took really nice pictures. And I said yes, but I wouldn't know of what. And then he would say, well, I'm going to show you. So he pointed out the things that were interesting to him. And that's how our relationship started. And it actually turned from photographs to filming on the same device. So that was also quite interesting. So I had a very intimate relationship with somebody that was very advocating the Yagan culture, but always through artifacts. Whatever he exposed and built and rebuilt were artifacts that were kind of remakes of the original thing, because they all had been destroyed and gone. And through that, I could depict him in very different moments. So one of them was when he prepared his food.
Right.
Yeah. On the other side of town, behind Villa Okika, there was the seafood factory, which was a high-tech place, running a shift system, straight exporting to China. Market value of king crabs from Chile, from that part in China, is 100 times higher. So you would find a lot of the sons and daughters of the elderlies working in that factory. And it was a very hard time to get in and film, because they would never allow that. And somehow I wrote so many letters to the company owner in Santiago de Chile, also with the help of the Goethe Institute, I must say, because they could get the stamp on that they would allow me that in exchange to the footage. So I would say, I have no problem showing you your own factory on video. And so it happened they quite enjoyed what I did, and the first time, so they would call me in again and again when they had a new machine. So I became the company kind of visual representative. Yeah. And the image is quite brutal, quite violent, because they take out about 11 tons per month. And the way they deal with these animals is just, gives a good picture of how a global economy works. On the other side, you have the isolated man who still tries to hunt, but who's not allowed to hunt. Yeah, so because the Yagan were hunters and gatherers. So there's a strong opposition. Martin, who I lived with, would never take a job. He would never work there.
Right.
So he was very, very poor in a way.
Sorry.
If you end up with a story you started with,
Yeah.
then you're not listening along the way. I would strongly relate it to that piece, but in general, I'm also somebody who really tries to be quite open-minded when I start a project. Even with the rappers, when we started with the original pitch, we wouldn't even know if a rapper would work with me. Yeah. So it's really about that process that was very strong in Tierra del Fuego, because I was alone, on my own, down there. So 4 months really in the place, and 6 months in total. And it was about editing the footage. I was collecting a lot of footage, and editing became, about sculpting the piece that exists. And even with the following work, again, which is the third work shown at the power plant, I would say I could control maybe about 50% of the production, but then we went into a live situation with the interviews that I could not. So it's for me really about taking a risk and not necessarily knowing everything. So about in the second half of the film, we step into a situation of very close-up interviews of 10 German citizens. But all these 10 German citizens have escape or migration experience in their life. That means they had multiple homes. And they hailed from Chile, escaping the Pinochet regime, or they would escape the GDR, East Germany, to live in the West. Some of them even returned. Or they would be captured by the Hungarian army when they tried to cross the border illegally. I was interested in preparation of that project that deals with either civil courage or vigilantes justice, like a key essential question for a society, from the perspective of people who might have more experience than I would have on these issues of feeling alienated, trying to communicate something in a different country, and somehow feeling that that might end up in a violent situation for them, yeah, or they would feel endangered. So it was in the research process also to bring forward experiences within Germany for such a hotly debated topic from the perspective of knowledgeable people. You know, I'm always trying to work with people that have a completely different knowledge than I do, and to collaborate them in order for, first of all, to learn something for me, and hopefully also to share that with a larger audience. So what I found striking when we produced the film, so they were there live in the studio. Previously, they didn't really know what they were getting into. I gave a general introduction that this is a film production. I want them to be present. It's a bit like a theater play. But in the end, it's about a difficult situation that deals with civil courage, vigilante justice, and hopefully they could help us to reflect on that. Yeah, that was kind of the working situation for them. And I gave them about 3 minutes time to reflect on that after we shot the reenactment. Yeah, so it was a very short time frame in which they had to remember things and even speak about them, which is quite difficult. And I really wouldn't know what they would come up with. I spent with each of them a long time in private in the months before. So we knew each other pretty well. I did 90-minute interviews with them in their houses, so they could familiarize with me, but also with the camera, and we learned about each other. So it was a kind of a conversation just for training purposes. And the remarks they gave were so extraordinary because they really were able in a very short time frame to explain why they think that, you know, the system failed to protect the refugee, or it was it reminded them of their own feeling of being captured or even tortured, or the feeling of trying to look for a new future, but, you know, being rejected. That is, I think, very remarkable about that generation that looks at such an incident with much more experience and depth and life experience as well. So I thought it championed somehow what I was trying to do, is to bring forward the conversation about civil courage in our republic, because actually nobody was really taking care of that case anymore since it was dismissed by the court. And the court said there is no public interest in a man who died in a forest, frozen to death, and was previously bound to a tree. And I think that was really the scandal. And it was all also available on YouTube. So somebody actually filmed it in a supermarket, and only then it became a trial. If that person would have not put it on YouTube, nobody would ever known about that. What is another interesting direction is that the person who actually put it on YouTube was defending the 4 men who tied him to the tree. So the video starts 2 minutes before they even entered the supermarket, and they had cable binders with them when they entered the supermarket. And even the woman, in the end, comments live on the YouTube video saying, well, I'm so glad that these men are here. Yeah. So it raises a lot of questions also about how our justice system works and when it actually is being activated. It was really through YouTube. Because the police didn't find anything wrong in that situation. They actually took the refugee from the tree into custody, and the 4 men walked without being identified. It was a small village, so everybody knew each other. And it went totally forgotten in the media, of course. There was an outcry for 1 day, and then it's a new newspaper. So the 2 lead journalists that covered that case from beginning till end became also my collaborative partners, so they would hand over all the documents, all the background interviews they did, everything they could not publish, everything they knew about the caretaker of the refugee, for example. And I could write a script based on that. Yeah, but then I really, really wanted, and that's what we worked for, a reflection on what happened from people who experienced it as a theater play, mimicking it, but still, it's kind of violent if somebody gets beaten up in front of you, right? Even if it's a theater play, you feel it. And the way they reflect on it, I mean, it's about 20 minutes, so it's hard to summarize because they're also individual. But it's an amazing memory that comes alive again, because we had a lot of these incidents in the 90s in Germany, and people remember that and they openly talk about it. And I think that's really the value of these 10 citizens, that they came forward. Yeah, I mean, it is not surprising if you look at Germany's map that such an incident and many other incidents happened near my hometown, Dresden. So that incident happened, for example, in a village, only 20 minutes away. I spent part of my childhood there. What is geographically interesting, that Dresden is a valley, or one step back, Dresden has very different election results than a city 100 kilometers away, like Leipzig. It's very conservative. And it was already conservative, more conservative, and quite special in the GDR because it's based in a valley. And in that valley, you would not receive the Western TV signal, which you would get in other parts of East Germany. So we were always called like the people, the unknown, the people that know not so much. We live in the valley of not knowing much because we didn't have the right signal. We didn't have access to the class find, right? We didn't learn about capitalism early on. We learned it just after the 1990s. And somehow, the location of Dresden is really remarkable. And a lot of sociologists really try to find out why people in that region are so active in anti-Muslim movements and protests and also violence. There's no easy answer to that. But there is also a pride of being special in the special place. Yeah? Special as East German. Somehow, the feeling of being frustrated and neglected in the last 30 years. And then, you know, when more refugees arrived, they felt immediately that something is being taken away from them. You know, basically, the respect for their work. So they would only earn a little bit more than what refugees get as a general support. So you could feel that in that YouTube video, in this incident, that there is also a way that they felt oppressed and they need somebody to oppress. They need a weaker person and they need to show that weaker person who's in charge. I mean, that was also partly what I talked with my jury members, if you want to call them like this. It is true that the economic situation of a cashier in East Germany is very precarious. So in order to, either you work for a very low salary or you would sign up for like general support, and that the difference between that job and the general support is not much. So a lot of people in the low paid sector are very skeptical of refugees because they would, maybe less, 100, 200 euros less. And they would maybe even get a free apartment, they get a free washing machine, they get free, you know, many things, free internet. So I would say what is quite interesting for the East, that the experience with migrants and people from other places was very, very limited. So we had guest workers, we had students, and they were all put into places amongst themselves. So there was a house for students from the West Sahara, from Angola, from Cuba, and there were the guest workers that actually lived basically almost in the factory. They were only working at night shift. And my Cuban participant, German Cuban participant, he actually would tell me that he only worked night shifts all his life because that was the company's idea to keep the workers separated because they had separate pay. And this is again the background research I did, and that didn't find its way into the piece yet. Yeah. But it was quite interesting to be in touch with protagonists of that time and to listen to experiences they had with both states also. And that was also interesting for me, that generation was active in the GDR, but also in the West. And my participants somehow managed to put another experience first, to see like the human condition, rather than acting or defending the four men as heroes, because they actually also come to word in the film. Yeah, we should not forget that. It's not only that my 10 jury members reflect on what happened, it's also the four protagonists speak out. No, I think it is a sentiment that exists. I would say there's a certain generation that is very much defending their homeland. We don't know what that homeland is, but they're defending it. And that term soil polluter, I mean, that's also something very specific, is a kind of a slogan for the ultra right wing, where they would say that if somebody steps on our soil that is not German, yeah, even though we would need to define who's German, he would pollute the soil. And it's actually a Harvard business school trained lawyer who uses that word in my video, who says the soil polluters are endangering our culture, our economic system, our social system. I mean, you have to understand that. That was his tweet also, yeah. Exactly, so even like, and he was running for mayor in the city where the refugee hostel was based. So you would have an AfD politician, like really like the Le Pen kind of politics, to take care of refugees who are suffering epilepsy, who don't speak the language. One must also say Shabazz came to get medical treatment in Germany. He didn't want to stay. He wanted to go back because he had family back in Iraq. So he was the one responsible over several months for several people. And when Shabazz went missing around in January, he would take him, he would write letters to the hostel, but the hostel director was in Australia on holidays. So it took him 3 weeks to call the police to say, well, I don't reach my refugee, I don't know what to do. Yeah, so that's the kind of caretaking that we talk about in a very organized country where everybody is like, yeah, somehow following the law and order. And again, there's another quote that we have in the film, is like, if that would have happened to a German, if I would go missing, let's say for 2 days, the helicopter would go up and would search for me immediately, because I had an identity, yeah? And in a way, you know, I would claim that we do not, as Germans, have the relationship to the soil as indigenous people do, but we have suffered not to experience our national identity in public since World War II. So, since a few years, and I think, I mean, in my point of view, since we had the World Championship of soccer in Germany, Germans started to wave their national flag again on the streets. That was, for me, personally, a key experience when the national identity was okay again. So there is also, I think, a general skepticism within Europe about the European Union. And of course, our media plays into that, because that goes back to actually initial question, that we see a lot of news about European bureaucracy, how European money is spent. Then you have the refugee crisis, a lot of people coming to Europe, and of course, we only understand it will be a burden. You know, nobody really sees a chance in that. So, for example, if you look into the economic future of Europe, we will need a lot of workforce. Yeah, and these news are very, very peripheral in the news media, because, yeah, nobody really steps up to that. So, in the media, problems are dominating. You know, you don't hear about good things; you hear more about the negative things, and that somehow also gives people who depend on these news outlets maybe also the feeling of that everything is going wrong, everything is going bad, because you also need to compare what you read and see. And in the rural areas where this also happened, you have, of course, a lot of escape to the city. Yeah, so one sociologist I worked with actually also researched on that a lot of men stay in the rural areas because they inherit the house and the land, but not the women. They take off, they will go study, and they stay in the city. Yeah? So you also have a very different kind of frustration amongst the rural communities that eventually leads to frustration and eventually then leads to violence. Yeah? Yeah, I can tell you, I mean, there's a tremendous difference between the time of research and time of production, but then, you know, you also have something called post-production, which means basically editing and bringing the piece to the final stage. So, for again, I don't know if you've seen the show? Okay, you will, great, thank you. So, let's talk about approximation, which took like 6 months, 10 months, 12 months, So it's a very long time learning, researching at the same time as then filming, and then you compose it. So I think again, approximation is a slow film as well. You know, so you actually are kind of, I try to train you to learn about the space and what's happening in an open way as I did. You know, it's not explaining you much. You have to see and feel and hear and find your own way to look at these things. And maybe they make sense, maybe they don't make sense, maybe you just feel alienated. That's also something valuable to me. Again, it was a long process because I needed to research the people that were a crucial part of the film, but also I need to compile all the information about the trial, about what happened, how we are going to present that, working with a screenwriter, to put that actually into a condensed form, because that is what a piece of art or a film or a theater play or a book is. It's not an uncontinuous format. You know, I'm happy if an audience gives me 40 minutes of their lifetime. I did a project that takes 9 hours to watch. That's a lot of lifetime. Yeah. Whatever the project asks for, you make works that are infinite. So that you gotta give him all your life. Yeah, and that is really stunning, but it doesn't mean that you have to watch all my 9 hours or spend your time in his show. It's sometimes enough if you see something. It's great if you come back. Again, it was, you know, we had the 2-minute news clip, we had the 30 seconds news clip, we had the radio thing, we had 2 newspaper articles. So that's also a condensed format, which is much more condensed what I try to do, because I have the 40 minutes. And how do I condense it? That's the magic of editing. But also like the screenwriting, what you put in, what is missing. We killed like 3-4 pages on the set because we were running out of time, so I knew, okay, I can fix this with voiceovers in the studio later on. So it's about creating a story that you have in mind before you go into production, to say, okay, this is what I need, this is how it should feel like, this is how it's going to look like, and hopefully we can make it. So let's say 10 months preparation, 2 days of shooting. Again, it's a 40-minute piece on 2 channels, 80 minutes shooting in 2 days. It's pretty insane. So twice 12 hours, and you try to be in the story and you try to make emotional images like this. And you work with non-professional actors. And you have to have a lunch break. So it is insane to condense it, and I often don't know how we do it. You have done much more work than me. I don't know how we did it. So for me, editing is the part I enjoy most. Besides the research, research can be painful because you need to find the access, and sometimes the access is not really there. Production I find very stressful, and editing I really love in a way, because it's where you tell your story, and you have a bit more time. You can have friends coming in, or consultants, or more experienced people, and you know, you ask again these questions that you asked at the beginning of the project, and that is something, yeah, for me it's really beautiful. You sit there in your dark room and the world is outside, and so. Yeah, so currently it's actually going through the kind of festival circuit, so it's going to documentary festivals, even though it's not really clear that it is a documentary, because it has, you know, another form, another visual language. But it's actually been respected in that circuit more and more. And it was, at some point, I contacted actually a TV broadcaster, Arte, which is a European broadcaster, if they would be interested to co-produce it. And they were. I was astonished about that, and they accepted it in the format it was, but they wanted a TV edit, yeah, in order to broadcast it. It cannot be on two screens, absolutely free, and that was a condition. I even have split screen sections. It got a bit tighter. So it will be broadcasted in autumn, and we expect quite a big, yeah, how should I call it, feedback. So they are actually aware that this is quite a tough film, because it really tackles relevant issues, and also in a non-compromising way. So a lot of things that are outspoken in the film will be reacted to. So the lawyers are in place, in other words, and the broadcaster actually took on that risk. So I also made clear to them that I'm a bit more vulnerable as an artist, an author of the work, than they might be. So it's not the same as a museum if you show exactly the similar work. The TV and cinema world works a bit differently, legally also. But nevertheless, because I offered them to change things in order to protect me. And they would say, no, we want to document the piece of art in TV. That's how they explained it. Yeah, and in that sense, other rights and maybe other, appropriation rights might apply. We will see. I'm kind of looking forward to it, but. Yeah, well, one strategy was to confront the people with the images being taken of them and see how they react to it. So to integrate that kind of archival material that has over decades and centuries been like the visual identity of them, which they didn't produce. And I think why I showed the last part of approximation is that I actually manipulated these images to say, well, they were anyway manipulated before, and now I'm manipulating somehow to my extent in order to make this manipulation visible. That is connected to the music, because I can never represent anybody or anything per se or incomplete, but I can say I'm here to think about the representation of me in this place in relation to the history of the representation of the place. So also approximation is kind of a landscape film because it tries to depict the landscape as we want to see it and as we feel we wish to be there, but then it's also, you see building sites, but you see a tree, you see a remake of an indigenous hat, so you see a factory. So it's actually like a puzzle of things in order to avoid to say, oh, this is what it is. No, it's not. And also I don't tell you how to look at these images, what your personal emotion would be to that. Because it is what it is. And somehow I believe in a somewhat documentary notion of the image because it might bring us to other conclusions. So I like to look at things, but of course I manipulate these things that you might be interested in them. The colors, the sounds, yeah. But I would say these are not easy images. And for me, it was really hard to live there under these conditions. But it also did something with me. And really, for months, I didn't touch the camera. There was no need because I didn't understand anything. And I think you find a lot of traces in these places. And if you go and see, for example, the big billboard outside the power plant, it's a beautiful image. And in one particular area, you see a road. Yeah, and that road is what altered the landscape. So, yeah,